Welcome back to JKLive. We're just about to get into our discussion. Remember, you can join into that discussion in terms of comments and questions using the hashtag JKLive. Now, since it was established under the National Cohesion and Integration Act of 2008, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, or NCIC, has been leading the charge against hate speech in this country. However, in the wake of recent incidents, how effective have its efforts been? Well, joining me now to give reflections and a status update on the NCIC's track record are the first NCIC Chairman, Dr. Mzalendo Kibunjia, and current NCIC Commissioner, Sam Kona. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Dr. Kibunjia, let me begin with you because you were at the helm when this all started. When you look back, are you content with the NCIC's work in tackling hate speech?
Of course not. I am not content because there are several incidents, both current now and a few years ago, where people have continued to incite Kenyans on basis of ethnicity and even religion. And those who know what happened 2007, 2008, these were the signs that led us to kill each other in hundreds. And I have been on record, even recent times, and saying NCIC should not let Kenyans drift that way. And because we really have a history, and history repeats itself. So, no, I am not content with what is happening now in the country.
So was it a case of NCIC not being effective enough at its job in curbing it, or just hate speech becoming something that was out of control in the country?
I think I was telling the producers behind the scenes that, humans forget very fast. And if you think about the gospel of Jesus Christ, which started 2,000 years ago, we go to church every Sunday to be reminded of it. Nobody says that because it was said 2,000 years ago that people know or remember it. So it was very unfortunate that when we were at high pitch in terms of curbing hate speech, there was a lapse when there were no commissioners for almost 2 years. So Kenyans forgot, and the current commission has not been able to pick up from, neither the previous one or the current has been able to pitch. You need to remind people every day. So if we had got to the point where there were no-go zone, there are things that you can say and sustained that over the years, I think Kenyans would have learned that hate speech in this country is something that is not acceptable. It's deplorable, it's sad and unfortunate, and we should keep away from it. Unfortunately, that break, just the same way that we don't pass Sundays because we were told the other Sunday, is what has caused this problem, I believe.
Speaking of the current commission, Commissioner Kona, you sit in it now, and there's been debate as to whether you've been successful in trying to carry out that mandate of curbing hate speech. We've seen several investigations into hate speech of various leaders, but has there been a successful conviction when it comes to hate speech?
Thank you, Victoria, for having me this evening to discuss this important subject, which I think at the moment is of interest to most Kenyans. We've just been in office for less than a year, and I can tell you that over that period, we've all been able to witness high levels of hate speech, incitement, and dangerous rhetoric across the country. And it is something that we assist with as a commission. We currently have cases that are running, almost 40 of them that we are investigating. And I just want to underscore the fact that the issue of hate speech needs to be seen as a national problem beyond the fact that it is just something that is done by a few individuals. It goes to demonstrate that our country has a serious challenge, particularly a challenge relating to leadership, because most of the people who are often caught engaging in dangerous speech are people who have been privileged, who are privileged to occupy position in government or in society. And secondly, we've got a very serious problem of breakdown in national values. And because hate speech, as the former commissioner mentioned, former chairman mentioned, is supposed to be something that we all know that you're not supposed to incite people into violence. There's a certain kind of behavior that's expected of us as citizens and as leaders to embrace. And every time anybody is engaging in any form of hate speech or incitement, they know very well that they are inciting and they are doing something wrong. So the problem should be addressed at a more macro level, that there's a problem with those who are bestowed with the privilege to be in leadership. They have lowered the bar of leadership. They no longer conduct themselves with decorum, and they also do not care about the country. Just before the current noise about hate speech and so forth, we had the political group and other groups of leaders trying to agitate for their own communities or to create conditions that will make others feel insecure. So there is a tendency to see the prosecution of cases of hate speech as the solution to what ails our country. But I want to underscore the fact it is not actually the problem with hate speech. The problem is, are we able to live by the rule of law? Are we able to respect the fact that we are citizens and we need to be treated in a particular way? So that is what I will say in terms of this question about hate speech. It is the responsibility of every citizen to behave in a way that our law requires us to do, and to be mindful of how you behave and how it impacts on others.
And you mentioned the Commission is handling 40 cases. What has contributed to the increase? We're not in an election year or election cycle, which is when you'd expect an increase in such incidents. But what do you think is contributing to that?
It's our political culture that is holding the country behind. Our democracy has matured. Our constitution is robust in many respects, but the political culture is lagging behind, and it's what is making the country to move backward. Every time there is an issue that requires maybe distribution of resources or appointments in government or any other thing, the first line of mobilization is ethnic identity. The second line is people think about excluding others and not bringing them on board. So our political culture is what is creating this temporary state of almost madness in the country, where even a simple thing like, for example, sharing of revenue or issues to do with boundary review, they become a do or die thing because people can only mobilize because of their tribe. They can only mobilize because of their region, not on the basis of the ideals that they stand for. But also, I think for the political class, and I think this is something that needs to be interrogated. Most of them, when I've taken the issue of hate speech to be a populism thing, if they want to be re-elected in parliament or in Senate or to be considered by their communities as their heroes, they begin by threatening others. They begin by portraying other communities or other groups as the reasons why their own communities are behaving the way or their conditions are the way they are. And so for some people, it's like child play. But all these things are the ones that usually prepare people for a very dangerous election. I think it's only in Kenya where people fear elections more than even terrorism or violent extremism, because elections here are about me versus them. It's about my tribe versus the other. And sometimes it becomes so cutthroat that we do lose lives, and also other aspects of our society, like business and so forth, go into a standstill. So I still go back to the fact that our political culture and the way we mobilize, the way we perceive others is what is making cases of hate speech to rise. And then, of course, ever since the last election, we've always more or less been in a kind of a continuous election mode. You remember before COVID came in, there was a lot of movement across the country around the BBI process. People were mobilizing among it because of whether to reject or to accept the BBI thing. So we've been in a sustained state of political mobilization since 2017. And when you're in that kind of state, it is very easy to be tempted to incite, to scare, to intimidate, and so forth.
Right. And from what you've described, there seems to be a fundamental problem with political speech in this country, which we'll get to. But I want to go back to the whole issue of prosecution, because, that seems to be the area or the place where Kenyans have lost faith in the NCIC's ability to deal with hate speech. If we're able to see more prosecutions, it sends a message that this is wrong, that you will pay the price. Dr. Kibunjia, why do you think it's so difficult to prosecute hate speech in a court of law?
Well, there are several reasons, because there's a very thin line between freedom of speech and hate speech, and that also I remember during our time was a very sticky thing. But other than prosecution, also we must also blame the society that we live in. You should give examples of in America. If you are a politician in the American system, and you called African American nigger, that's the end of your political career. We want to get to that level where we're telling Kenyans that if you say certain things, then we should shun you completely and not allow you in our society. I mean, in recent times, the slur against the Mamangina family, if you are a student of history, for example, you know what happened in 1952 during the emergency and what happened, and you realize that some of these people contributed to the freedom and life we're enjoying, then you would be careful not to say certain things that are being said today. And I remember during our time we were saying that every Kenyan, whether you're an engineer or an economist, you must learn Kenyan history, because then I think we will respect each other that way. The way we are now in society is that when someone makes an unfortunate comment, like some of what we're hearing today, we laugh at it, or we say, we should not do that. And if we do that, coupled with the prosecution, then we will be a better society. So let's not only think that the only way that we can curb hate speech is by prosecuting people. Why would you accept someone who has insulted an icon in this country in a church and allow them to speak? You should tell them no. Then they will know the boundary. Someone was saying that if you are farming, if you have a neighbor, you farm up to where your boundary reaches, and you stop there. The way it is in this country is there is no stop in political speech. You can say whatever you want, and we're okay with it. I think that's what we need to do. We need to provide socialization that tells people you have to respect each other, whatever ethnicity you belong to, but also coupled with a prosecution. Prosecution alone cannot help this problem.
So can political speech then be limited by the law, if at all? Because you're saying that's the problem. You mentioned, using offensive words like the N-word in the U.S. It's obvious when you use that, that's it for you politically. But how do we get to that point? Do we have to go the legal route to almost shape political speech and define it?
I think we need a sustained campaign. I think I really believe that if the commission that we were in when we started, if that commission had continued for maybe 10 years, where we told people stop this, people will have learned very quickly. I said people forget very fast. Unfortunately, we tried the best, and then after that there was a lull. There was no commissioners in between, but also moving very, very quickly to tell people this is unacceptable. I think you remember during our time when some musicians composed songs insulting other communities, and we moved very fast to get them arrested. And those other people who are waiting to compose songs to counter those ones stopped. You cannot stop this if people think that you can do this and tomorrow and the day after and continue. So what I would really wish that the current commission will do is to be on the lookout and nip this thing in the bud very, very quickly, but also let the politician know that their political career is in line if you use this offensive language on others on basis of you mobilizing or wanting to get elected. Moving very fast is the best thing, not keeping quiet until things move on. And I think during our time, you remember even in radio stations, when you had guests like us and the inciting people, you would be shunned completely. There would be no media house that will hear any of your interview. We need to go back to that it's a collective effort. Media, society, and the law to be able to help the society to nip this bad behavior.
And let's talk about an area that I guess can be considered the new frontier when it comes to hate speech, and that's social media. It's largely ungoverned. Before, you were dealing with maybe leaflets, radio stations, music, television, rallies. But now you're in a space where someone can create a pseudo account and put all manner of things on social media and incite people. It's extremely difficult to try and crack down on that space. But Commissioner Kona, what is being done now?
Thank you. Maybe before I respond to the question of social media, I just wanted to mention something about NCIC and hate speech by saying that NCIC, first of all, does not have prosecutorial powers. What the best we can do is to assemble evidence and present it in court. Secondly, for us to present the cases in court, we all know the history and the performance of our judiciary and the court processes. So it cannot only be hate speech that is judged to be lagging behind in terms of prosecution. There are many other segments of our society issues which do not get fully concluded through our prosecutorial processes. To talk about the issues of corruption, economic crimes, and so forth. But also to say that you cannot really legislate human behavior 100%. What we all require is to know we all know what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And sometimes these issues of hate speech are issues about what is right and what is wrong. And all leaders, all citizens have an understanding or at least some knowledge about what is acceptable within our society, what is not acceptable, what do our laws allow, and so on. So legislating every aspect of our life is not going to be the solution. The solution is going to be in an overall of our all social attitudes and national social values and so forth and so on. And I think there is a tendency to focus on the individual element of what is happening. But what we are witnessing in our country, with hate speech being one of the lenses we have to try to see our country, is a gradual decay of our institutions. Some of them are not independent, others are dictating others are directing others. And you find, like a case now which triggered this particular one, a whole holder of an office wagging his finger against the presidency. How do you undermine your own office, which you sought to protect, to defend, and to uphold with the highest level of dignity and respect? So we need to reflect even the fact that we need to respect our institutions. If it is IBC, if it is the Office of the Prosecutor, if it is DCI, if it is NCIC, we have to learn as a country to respect those institutions and give them the space to operate and do their work. Any day you undermine one of them, you are undermining the whole country. Anytime one institution dictates to the other, you are undermining the whole governance architecture in the country. And that is why I say the problem is bigger than just addressing one single thing called hate speech or corruption. It requires an overhaul of all the value system that we have as a country. And I think one of the biggest challenges to prosecution of hate speech cases is the tendency for us to embrace as a country what I would call selective justice. Selective justice where some people get away with it, others do not get away with it. What selective justice does is to nurture the culture of impunity. It breeds a culture of arrogance in some of the people, and of course undermines the public trust in those institutions. And so even when people want to bring their cases or want to bring evidence, the fact that they do not trust the institutions, which we systematically destroy by undermining them, then we are left in a vacuum. So we must learn to respect our institutions, and those who have been given the chance to lead those institutions must uphold the institutions with the dignity, honor, and respect that is required of them. Social media is one of the things we are currently dealing in. We have a whole team that monitors what goes on social media. It is definitely the most complicated frontier in terms of churning hate speech, and the faces are invisible. But just like everybody else who is dealing with this new phenomenon of social media and cybercrime, we are all working to make sure that we strengthen our systems and ensure that we are able to penetrate the nameless accounts that so often become the platforms for threatening others and also giving dangerous speech.
Now, you mentioned, Commissioner Kona, several times in the interview that people would know that they are being offensive or they've used hate speech. But, there's been accusations that even the law that deals with hate speech is too broad and it's too vague. And I guess for the sake of the viewers, what exactly is hate speech? What constitutes hate speech?
Hate speech in its most simplified form is any act of behavior or utterance that threatens the security and comfort of the other person, or any action that you take with the purpose of inflicting harm or damage to the other person. So it is more about how the person who is receiving your behavior or the statement you have made, how those people feel, that is more important than what you who is speaking or doing something has in mind. So if, for example, I say a community A and B are becoming a menace in this region, that statement might appear innocent, but for people who understand the context in which you mentioned it, will know that that one is just a silent or a quiet threat directed to us. So it does not have to be openly obvious that I am going to kill you, or I'm going to destroy you, I'm going to burn your house. People are intelligent to know that that one will definitely put them in confrontation with the law. But we also know that when you hide it, those who live in that context will understand it, and they are able to bring it to our attention. And of course, we investigate and find out, why did this statement create fear or suspicion in this other group? And when we are able to establish the threshold for it, then we go for the person who said that to explain what they meant, with a view to assuring the person who feels offended about hate speech. So that is the simplest way I can put what hate speech is.
And Dr. Kibunje, I want to get your reaction to what Commissioner Kona called selective justice. When you're looking at who gets the hate speech charges or tag, depending on which political camp you're in. And it appears that maybe the government of the day is trying to settle political scores and absolve others, because you've seen, at least in the past, where someone could say something very offensive. A few years later, they're taking selfies with the person they said something against. What do you say to that kind of selective meeting of hate speech charges?
Yeah, and that's why I was saying that you need a sustained campaign, and I think there's something that was working when we were in the commission, where we were encouraging Kenyans to become each other's keeper. That you don't have to wait for NCIC to report hate speech, that even you in your village, you can report it. Anyone, if you see it, whether it's a post, you can be able to report it. And I think it was going very well. These issues of selective legislation or selective justice may not end. We are not a perfect society. We have to work on it. But I think the only way you can say it, that you don't have to wait for the president or a minister who is aligned to this direction to say that so and so is insightful. There need to be a society feeling that this is wrong, and it doesn't matter which part of the political system that I am in. I think what has happened is that we let people drift so far to the point where now we have Tanga and we have, Kieleweke, and people took position. So that now people in one side of the political divide are not keepers of the other side. That is what we should have not let go. But unfortunately, I don't think it's too late, because I think the political context, it's 2 years away, and I think we can pick up pieces and make sure that we don't drift that far. But we are not perfect society. These things will happen, but we should not let them continue very far down the road.
All right, on that note, let's take a short break here on JKLive. Before we do, a comment here on Twitter from George Mimba saying, I will not take hate speech and corruption as serious offenses until the day I will see IEBC bar a presidential candidate, a member of parliament, or MCA aspirant from contesting their seats. Otherwise, it remains a familiar song. Keep your questions, comments coming. Hashtag JKLive. The discussion continues. Continue our discussion on hate speech and how to curb it effectively, especially looking at the role of the NCIC. A tweet here from Kelly Kosgei saying, what is the difference between hate speech and freedom of speech? And I've seen that debate coming across on social media, especially with the recent incidents of hate speech. But let me invite my guest once more, Dr. Kibunjia, first NCIC chairman, and current Commissioner Sam Kona. Let me begin with you, Commissioner. In terms of the difference between hate speech, so essentially where hate speech begins and freedom of speech ends, what's the difference between the two?
Freedom is comes with responsibility. So when you're exercising your freedom, you're also responsible on what you say and what you do, particularly on how it impacts on others. Hate speech does not have responsibility following your freedom of speech. So anybody who is engaged in hate speech always abdicate their responsibility part of their speech. So that to me will be the difference. So those who want to enjoy their freedom of speech, enjoy that freedom of speech with responsibility. Most of the people who are engaged in hate speech do not embrace the responsibility aspect of their freedom. That is why what they say or do ends up affecting others or creating animosity or sometimes even losing lives. And by the way, for us as NCIC, anytime there is an incident for hate speech, especially the one that escalates to the level of communities and so on, we are always the ones who come again and clean up the mess. So we actually know as an institution that hate speech kills. Hate speech creates more problems in our society than fixing them. And just like today, I was in Narok South, and based on what we've been seeing for the last 1 week, hate speech can also reverse progress that we've made in dialogue processes among communities. The communities I met today were so apprehensive. They were unsure about this cohesion and peace we are talking about. We've been talking about with them for the whole year because of what our national leaders have been doing at the national platform. So anytime you are engaged in hate speech as a citizen, just to know that you have used your freedom, but you have not embraced the responsibility demanded of you as your civic duty. If you want to enjoy your freedom of speech, enjoy it with the responsibility that accompanies it. And that responsibility is not on you, it's on what you do, say, or imagine, and how it impacts on the rest of the society.
Dr. Kibunjia, I've seen some quarters saying
I want also.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I add something about that? The examples that I usually give. If you live in an apartment block and you have that space and you have a title to it, you cannot play loud music because you like it. Because if you play, your neighbor's child will wake up. People who have bad ears, they will break their eardrums, etc., etc. You have the title for that space, it's yours, but there are certain things you can't do when you live in a community. That's the way I describe it. Or the other way I usually like explaining it is that when you have a space and you stretch all your hands, you can do anything within those hands. But when you start touching the next person, then that's where now your freedom ends. So, and nobody lives like an island. So you cannot go in the middle of a community and start insulting people because you have freedom, or you know how to coin nuance and say whatever you want.
I've seen some quarters saying, at least with the recent incidents of hate speech, at least the ones that have been tagged hate speech, saying why not be a civil case, it being a libel or defamation case as opposed to a criminal case, and you know, introducing that element of criminalizing dissenting voices or voices that don't agree with what the government of the day feels is right. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, let me say it this way. If you say something and you know it may not lead to any consequences on your community where you are or a certain group of people, then it's okay. But when you say something when you know really exactly that it will affect other people, then that is not acceptable. And I have always told people, yes, you can talk about freedom of speech. This is okay. It's enshrined in the Western society. But we don't live in Western society. We can't have the same values like they have. We have to be sensitive to the environment that we live, that we were put together by the colonial powers. And there are certain things that those people who espouse or are happy with with the freedom of speech don't enjoy. So know your environment and act that way. But you cannot say, I want to be like the Greeks or like the British. You are not socialized the same. You don't have the same institutions. And that's how the whole debate about democracy and freedom of speech, what environment are we talking about those things and making sure that they are in the right place. Something is acceptable here, it's not acceptable in another place. And those are some of the things that we should understand as we exercise this freedom that we have.
And let me go to Commissioner Connor and just yeah.
Can I just that
you can respond? Yes, go ahead.
I think one of the things that we need to appreciate as a society is that Kenya, there are so many tensions that exist within our communities. Secondly, what happens at the national level or at the level of leaders impacts on how the communities feel. In a perfect scenario, that case will be easily regarded as a defamation case or a libel case and so on. But in Kenya, any attack on any individual, particularly if that person holds a particular position in society, is usually presumed to be an attack on the communities. You saw what happened in Emuri just the other day, where the MP was arrested, and you had people protesting and even demanding to protect him. So that tells you that when a crime is committed in a context where there is already existing tensions or fragile relationships, that crime is likely to be used as an excuse to still express your grievances or the problems you have with each other. But also, the leaders, as I said earlier, the leaders do mobilize people along ethnic lines. And because of that, when the leader is in trouble, it's perceived to be the community is also in trouble. And it's not only in terms of cases of hate speech and so on. Every other time you go to any part of the country, a criminal incident happens between two neighbors. They could be from the two clans or two tribes. But suddenly, it acquires a tribal dimension, and the whole clan or the whole community is mobilized in response to an incident which ideally should have been dealt with between two families or between two individuals. The whole group is brought in. That is because there are pre-existing tensions within these groups. There are grievances that have not been resolved, and Kenyans are generally hurting. So any excuse for them to engage in crime or to revenge or to inflict harm on their neighbor is used. And this publicity of hate speech cases among politicians has serious repercussions on the ground. And that is why it should not be treated as just a defamation case, because there's a community element, which is more serious even than the war between the politicians or the leaders who are defaming or insulting each other. You are likely to have more consequences at the societal level. And that's why we need to...
Yeah. And let's speak to that community element, because you mentioned how the NCIC comes in to deal with the fallout of divisive comments made by leaders. But, you know, when you're looking at one of the key roles, it's in the name of the NCIC, it's to cultivate cohesion. Has the Commission been successful in that? And you know, I really ask that in a very cautious way, because still today, we are seeing it being so easy to fan tribal flames in various parts of the country. Has the NCIC failed in that respect?
I wouldn't say that NCIC has failed. When you look at the mandate of NCIC, the question of values, the question of cohesion, the question of integration, you cannot achieve integration and cohesion within a generation. You need to have at least 2 generations where you have a sustained campaign of changing the values, where you have a sustained campaign of strengthening the institutions of governance in a way that everybody feels comfortable with them. You need a change in the electoral and political culture where people now can be elected by anyone. It is not something that you can do now and expect results tomorrow. It's a whole resocialization process that will take a lot of time. What we are currently doing as a strategy is to make sure that, first and foremost, we bridge the divides that exist in our society. We address the conflicts that divide communities, because so long as there are tensions or there are conflicts or groups are disagreeing, the question of cohesion and integration becomes a distant dream. So we want, first of all, to secure the country, get the communities to begin to embrace and live each other, and even push them to the level at which they can be able to reconcile their differences and forge a future where they have a shared vision, a shared aspiration. And then that way now you can inculcate the right values about neighborliness, about peace, about nationhood, about patriotism. Those are 2 generations. You need about at least 30 to 50 years. And it has to start at some point, and the starting point is where we are. So I will not say we are not succeeding as a commission. We are facing the right direction. We are lining up the right strategies to begin that engagement of dealing with the big question of cohesion and integration. And I'm happy you've mentioned the issue of integration and cohesion, because the main mandate of NCIC is to create a cohesive, harmonious, and integrated Kenya. Hate speech is just one of those abnormalities in our societies, which is so disruptive that it has to be put and addressed so that other agendas like cohesion, peace, and those other bigger aspirations can be pursued in a state where communities do not fear each other, or they cannot easily be excited into a state of violence and so on. And I think the other thing that we are also doing is, and I think the former commissioner, chairman alluded to it, we also want, going forward, that if any politician or any leader has appeared in a case of hate speech, that person, if he appeared 1 or 2 times or 3 times, whatever threshold will come up with, should be denied to run for any public office. He should be denied to run for any political office, because hate speech, just like corruption, destroys societies and it destroys life. And if you are the kind of leader who thrives in driving divisions and creating tensions and using violence to intimidate, you should not lead our society at any level and in any office. And I think if we are able to secure that, then people will begin to behave. If you know that for me to run in 2022, I need clearance from NCIC, I need to keep my books with the NCIC clear so that I can get that certificate. That is the kind of improvements we want to make within our act to enable us to move forward, and also to make the question of hate speech a very serious offense that affects not only the individuals who are directly affected, but the entire spectrum of our society.
And Dr. Kibunje, the last word goes to you, and really a response to a concern here. Koima Jr. from Twitter is saying, what is the usefulness of NCIC if it can't prosecute? Isn't it a waste of taxpayer money? And he's essentially asking, do we still need the NCIC if the track record has been seemingly so poor?
Cohesion and integration is not like an electricity switch. Now you're in dark and then you're in the light. It's a gradient. And I must give one example. I want to give Kenyans how NCIC has been very useful. Before the NCIC was formed, if you advertised for a job, whether in the ministry or wherever, and you found 10 Kalenjins, for example, and I don't mean being Kalenjins, who are qualified, you could hire all the 10 positions the Kalenjins. You could hire all the 10 Kalenjins to Kikuyus, or you could hire to Somalis. Today, the whole issue of saying the face of Kenya was as a result of the commission, where we're talking about equity, where we're talking about, if you are giving people jobs in the public service, you must make sure that there is equity in representation of ethnicity. Every year, the government of Kenya publishes list, including the one that was done, I think, a week or so, of what is the ethnic composition in the government. And we did the first ethnic audit, if you remember, and we pointed out that there are communities, when you say our government, they ask you, your government with who? Because even cleaners, they wouldn't get. There are also certain people in this country who, if you're advertising for the position of Attorney General, they will just fold their hands. But that's moving now. And I think one of the other aspects now we need to look at is the equity in the counties. When the counties were formed, for example, there were certain areas that were less developed than the others. What is going on in the counties to make sure that those areas that were higher than the others are being bridged to become a cohesive nation? We will take a long time. It's not something that we can do very quickly. And I think the right ingredients are there, and we are going, but we shouldn't lose hope because of just one item of hate speech that we have not delivered as a country.
Dr. Kibunjia and Commissioner Kona, thank you so much for your time. And as you say, dealing with the deep-rooted cultural issues in this country is not a quick fix. Keep those comments going. Hashtag JKLive. We will sample a few of your comments before we wrap up the show to see what you're saying on Twitter. This one coming in from It's Mudoka. The political class should be careful with the choice of language they use. Freedom of speech and opinion has limits too. All right, still on Twitter. This one from Cyrus Kublai saying, at common sense level, we know hate speech whenever we encounter it. Legally, it is different. A crime must have an element of harm. Prosecutorial challenge on hate speech is linking such utterances to a specific harm. Law against hate speech is by default ineffective. And the last one here from Frank Kubamba saying, anyone who propagates hate speech, the law should take its course. We can't interfere with Kenyans' peaceful coexistence. And on that note, that does it for JKLive. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Victoria Rubadiri. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Yula Nzale. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a great week ahead.